They said she would never recover, that no one could possibly survive the kind of storms that ripped through her life. Not just the hurricanes that tore her home apart, but the kind that break a person from the inside. Her name was Elena Morales, a woman from a small coastal town where the ocean was both a blessing and a curse. From the moment she was born, the wind seemed to whisper her destiny, strong, unpredictable, unstoppable. But no one, not even Elena herself, could have imagined how many times that same wind would try to destroy everything she loved. The first hurricane came when she was just 17. It roared in the middle of the night like a monster made of rage and water, swallowing homes, dreams, and memories in its path. Elena remembered the sound, not of the rain or the wind, but of a mother's scream when the roof caved in. By sunrise, everything was gone. Her home, her family's little grocery store, and the life she once knew. But even as she stood barefoot in the mud, drenched and shaking, she didn't cry. She simply whispered to herself, "I'm still here." That night changed her forever. Most people left the town after that, chasing safety somewhere inland, somewhere the sea couldn't reach. But not Elena. She stayed. She had nothing, but she had something stronger than money or luck. She had the stubborn belief that if she could survive that night, she could survive anything. For the next few years, she worked endless hours at a tiny bakery that somehow survived the storm. She cleaned tables, carried sacks of flour heavier than herself, and saved every coin she could. But the sea wasn't done testing her. Years later, when she was 25, and finally saving enough to rebuild her family's home, the second hurricane came. This one was worse. The wind screamed louder, the waves reached higher. And this time, it didn't just destroy her house, it took her father's life. She watched helplessly as the floodwaters swallowed everything she had worked for. In one night, her dreams collapsed again. Most people would have broken completely, but Elena, she broke differently. She didn't give up. She shattered and rebuilt herself stronger. The morning after the storm, when the world looked like a graveyard of memories, she stood among the ruins and said quietly, "You can take everything from me, but not me." She buried her father with her own hands, wrapped in what was left of his fishing net, and promised him that one day she would build something that even the storms couldn't destroy. For the next 5 years, Elena became a ghost of the coast. She wandered from town to town, working any job she could find, from cleaning hotel rooms to repairing nets for fishermen, from selling food in the markets to painting walls for a few dollars a day. Every night she wrote her dreams in a little notebook she carried everywhere. On the first page, she had written one sentence: "One day, the ocean will bow to me." That sentence became her anchor. It reminded her that no matter how many times life drowned her, she would always rise again. But fate wasn't done testing her resilience. When she finally saved enough to open a small cafe in her hometown, a modest place by the docks where she served warm bread and coffee to fishermen at dawn, the third hurricane arrived. It was the most brutal of all. It tore through the town like an unchained beast, flattening buildings, erasing streets, and leaving behind only silence. Elena watched from the evacuation shelter as her cafe was ripped apart by the wind. Every wall, every chair, every dream. This time she screamed. She cried until her voice disappeared. She fell to her knees, not because she was weak, but because she was human. For the first time in her life, she thought about giving up. What was the point of rebuilding if life was just going to tear it down again? What was the point of dreaming if every dream ended in ruins? Back then, amidst the rubble and the despair, she saw something. A little girl, barefoot, holding a piece of wood that once belonged to her cafe. The girl was crying, but when she saw Elena, she said softly, "My mom said your bread was the best in the world." Those words hit her harder than any hurricane ever could, because in that moment, Elena realized something profound. Her dream wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever believed in her. That night, as she sat on the cold floor of the shelter, surrounded by dozens of people who had lost everything, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She would rebuild again, not because she had hope left, but because she couldn't live without trying. She looked at the ocean and whispered, "You've taken everything from me, but now it's my turn." From that day on, Elena became unstoppable. She started with nothing, no money, no house, no family, only air wheel. She borrowed a broken food truck from a friend and began baking bread again. Her first oven was powered by an old car battery. Her first customers were the same people who had lost their homes beside her. Every loaf she baked carried a piece of her heart. People said her bread tasted like warmth, like resilience, like something that had survived the storm. Slowly, the word spread. Fishermen told travelers about the woman who baked through hurricanes. Reporters came. Photos were taken. Her story began to echo far beyond her town. Within a year, she had enough to buy a small warehouse, where she started producing bread for neighboring cities. But what made her brand unique wasn't the taste, it was the story behind it. Every package carried her motto, made by hands that refused to give up. And people felt it. Her company didn't just sell bread, it sold hope. It sold the reminder that no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises. By the time her bakery turned into a national business, Elena had become a symbol of resilience. The woman who survived 3 hurricanes and turned tragedy into triumph. Yet, deep inside, she knew her greatest victory wasn't the company she built. It was the person she had become. Because storms no longer scared her. She had learned to dance with them. She had learned that sometimes, destruction is life's way of clearing the path for something greater. And so, standing one morning by the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore, she smiled for the first time without fear. "You can come again," she whispered to the sea. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The storm wasn't just outside, it lived inside her. The rain had stopped, but the silence after the chaos was worse than the thunder. Her house was gone. The business she tried to build with trembling hands was now a memory buried under debris and mud. But even worse than losing everything was the feeling that she was disappearing too. Everyone told her it was over, that life doesn't give you second chances, let alone third ones. But that woman, barefoot, soaked her hands bleeding from digging through ruins, refused to believe it. Because deep inside her chest, even when the world collapsed 3 times, her heart whispered one word: rise. The second hurricane had taken more than her home, it took her faith. The third came when she thought she had nothing left to lose. But life always finds new ways to test those who dare to dream. When the sky turned gray again and the wind screamed her name, she didn't run. She stood in the middle of the street, defiant, shouting at the heavens, "If you're going to take me, then do it standing." The storm howled, but she didn't fall. That night, the hurricane passed, and for the first time, she realized what was left after destruction wasn't weakness. It was the purest form of strength. Days later, she walked through what was once her neighborhood. Nothing was left, only silence, ruins, and the smell of wet wood and lost memories. Yet somehow, among the wreckage, she found a small photograph half buried in the mud. It was her as a little girl, smiling in front of a wooden stand where she used to sell lemonade with her mother. That simple image broke her. She fell to her knees, crying until her tears mixed with the dirt. But that photo became her spark, because at that moment, she remembered who she was. A fighter, a dreamer, a survivor. She started again, not with money, not with resources, but with purpose. She gathered broken pieces of wood, salvaged metal, anything that could help her build a small space. People laughed. "What's she doing?" they said. "Doesn't she know it's useless?" But she didn't answer. Because when you've faced nature's fury and survived, the noise of doubt becomes nothing but a whisper. Every morning, before the sun rose, she worked. She learned, rebuilt. She sold whatever she could. Homemade candles, small crafts, anything that brought in a few coins. She watched YouTube tutorials by candlelight, learning business basics, digital marketing, anything that could help her understand how to grow. She failed again and again. Orders got lost. Clients disappeared. Some days, she went to bed hungry. But every night, she repeated the same sentence: "This pain will mean something." Months turned into years. Her hands, once fragile, became strong and steady. Her face, once marked by tears, began to glow with quiet confidence. She started to post her products online. At first, no one noticed. Then, one day, a woman from another city placed a small order, then another, then 10. One of her designs went viral on social media, simple handmade bracelet that said, "Still I rise." That phrase became her brand, her message, her life's echo. Within months, she had customers across the country. Her story began to spread not as tragedy, but as testimony. One morning, she received a message that changed everything. A university wanted her to come and speak. "We want you to tell our students how you did it," they said. She almost laughed. "Me?" she thought. "I'm just someone who refused to give up." But when she stood in front of those students, looking into their young, hopeful eyes, she realized something. She wasn't just a survivor. She was proof that pain can become purpose. Her voice trembled as she said, "You don't need perfect conditions to start. You need the courage to begin in chaos." The crowd went silent. Some cried. Others smiled through tears, and in that moment, she knew that all the nights she had spent rebuilding, all the hunger, all the storms, all the heartbreak, they had led her right here, to inspire others to rise from their own ashes. But destiny wasn't done testing her. Months later, another storm approached. It wasn't a hurricane this time, it was a business collapse. A major supplier failed her. Orders couldn't be delivered, and she lost almost everything she had built. For a few days, she felt that familiar darkness trying to creep back. But this time, she wasn't the same woman. She had already faced nature itself and survived. So she looked at her reflection and said, "If I could stand against the wind, I can stand against failure." She reinvented everything, pivoted her business model, learned commerce, and turned adversity into innovation. Within a year, her brand expanded internationally. Magazines called her the woman who defied the storm. She smiled when she saw the headlines, not out of pride, but gratitude, because what they didn't see was that behind that success was a woman who had once lost everything 3 times and still chose to believe. Today, when she tells her story, she doesn't talk about the hurricanes as disasters. She calls them lessons written by the wind. Because they didn't destroy her, they revealed her. The storm doesn't come to break you, she says to audiences around the world. It comes to strip away everything that isn't truly you. Her company now funds programs that rebuild homes for hurricane survivors. Every time she hands the keys to a family that lost everything, she remembers her own nights in the dark, waiting for dawn, and she whispers to herself, "This is why I didn't give up." Her journey became a movement. People across the globe began using her hashtag #StillIRISay- to share their own battles and victories. What started as pain became a wave of hope, echoing across borders, languages, and hearts. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a human can do is stand up after the storm, drenched, trembling, but alive, and say, "I'm still here." The wind had finally calmed, but her soul still roared with the memories of storms past. Every gust she had survived, every night she had cried on cold floors, every piece of her life lost and rebuilt, it all led to this moment. She stood on the balcony of the new building she had constructed with her own hands, looking out at the city that once doubted her, at the people who whispered that she couldn't rise again. And in that silence, she remembered every fallen house, every lost dream, every night she had woken up hungry and afraid. She remembered the pain, yes, but also the fire it had ignited within her, a fire that refused to be extinguished, a flame that no hurricane, no setback, no betrayal could ever touch. The journey had not been fair. Life had thrown everything at her, again and again, testing her resolve, her sanity, and her will to continue. There were moments when she had curled up on cold, wet floors, staring at ceilings cracked by the storms, thinking the world had forgotten her. But every time, something inside whispered, "You are more than the destruction. You are more than the pain." And slowly, painstakingly, she rose from the ruins, each step heavier than the last, yet carrying the weight of lessons learned and strength earned. Her body bore scars. Her hands were calloused and bleeding. Her eyes were rimmed with sleepless nights, but her heart had grown limitless, a vast reservoir of resilience that the storms could never reach. As she walked through the streets of her city, she saw the devastation still lingering from the hurricane's. Houses flattened, trees uprooted, families displaced. She could feel the despair of others as if it were her own. And she realized then that survival was not enough. She had to do more. She had to transform her pain into hope, her suffering into a blueprint for others to follow. So she began rebuilding, not just for herself, but for every soul who had been crushed under circumstances beyond their control. She created programs to educate, to support, to empower, and she shared her story in every corner where despair had taken root. Her words became a lifeline. You can rise, you must rise, and when you do, the world will follow. The climax of her journey was not a single victory, not a sudden windfall, not a public recognition. It was a cumulative, crescendo understanding that every tear, every sleepless night, every storm endured had forged her into a woman whose strength radiated far beyond herself. One evening, standing before a sea of faces at an international summit on disaster recovery, she spoke with a voice that trembled only from the weight of lived truth, not fear. I lost everything 3 times. I was broken. I was scared. I was alone. But in those moments of utter despair, I discovered something no hurricane could ever take from me. The choice to rise. And when you choose to rise, you are unstoppable. The audience erupted not just in applause, but in tears, in shivers, in a recognition of the human spirit's indomitable power. Her narrative spread like wildfire. News outlets covered her story. Social media shared her image, a woman standing tall against a backdrop of devastation, sunlight breaking through clouds behind her, a faint but unyielding smile on her face. Her message transcended borders, languages, and cultures. People who had been trapped in their own storms, financial, emotional, physical, found hope in her resilience, and the world began to understand. Survival was not merely endurance, but transformation. Pain was not a punishment, but a teacher. Failure was not an endpoint, but a launchpad. Even the storms that continued to batter other parts of the world could not shake her. She traveled to devastated regions, hands outstretched to help strangers rebuild their homes, their communities, their spirits. She became the embodiment of strength, tempered by empathy, courage sharpened by hardship, hope that was forged in the furnace of adversity. And everywhere she went, people whispered, she survived. But she has also taught us how to rise. Then came the moment that sealed her legend. A televised interview with millions watching worldwide. The interviewer asked, "How did you endure everything and still rise?" She paused, letting the gravity of her journey fill the silence. And then she spoke, her voice unwavering, her eyes bright with unshed tears and unbreakable resolve. "Because I refused to let storms define me. I refused to let fear dictate my life. I chose to rebuild, not just for me, but for everyone who believed they couldn't. And if I could rise from ruins, so can anyone." That statement became a mantra. Hashtags flooded social media. People began telling their own stories, inspired by hers, creating a ripple effect of courage and transformation. But the pinnacle of her journey was internal, not external. The moments when she looked into a mirror and saw the woman who had once been terrified, starving, and hopeless, and now saw a being who carried storms in her eyes, fires in her heart, and oceans of compassion in her soul. She realized that her victories weren't measured in money, fame, or even rebuilt structures. They were measured in the lives she touched, the hope she spread, and the undeniable truth she now lived. Adversity is temporary, but resilience is eternal. Her final act of triumph was quiet yet profound. She organized a foundation for disaster survivors, creating scholarships, rebuilding homes, and mentoring women who, like her, had once thought their world had ended. And while the storms continued to rage elsewhere, she became the human lighthouse, the proof that devastation could give birth to greatness, that despair could seed hope, that surviving three hurricanes was not just about enduring nature, but about mastering the art of rising above every trial life threw in her path. Years later, she stood again on the balcony of her rebuilt home, overlooking a city now thriving, alive, and full of stories of triumph. She thought back to the nights she had prayed in the dark, to the silence that had threatened to swallow her, to the fear that had whispered she would never rise. And with a calm smile, she whispered to herself, "I didn't just survive. I became the storm. I became the hope. I became the proof." And in that moment, the world understood what she had always known. To rise after falling is human. To rise after falling 3 times, with your spirit unbroken and your heart open, is legendary. Because some stories aren't just about survival. They are about showing the world that even after the fiercest storms, light can return, courage can prevail, hope can spread, and one determined soul can turn devastation into a legacy that inspires millions, ignites tears, and reminds humanity that no force, no hurricane, no tragedy can extinguish a heart that refuses to surrender. And so, as the sun set behind her, casting golden rays over a city that had once doubted her, she raised her hands to the sky, letting the wind carry her strength, her courage, and her story across oceans and continents. A living testament to resilience, determination, and the unbreakable human spirit. And the world watched, cried, and learned that surviving is not enough, is rising again and again, that makes us immortal.